All right, welcome everybody. This is the 1 o'clock session in the cmsphilly.org community track. This session is the UX Roundtable, hosted by Suzanne. Suzanne will want to introduce you. Before we do that, just a reminder to all our attendees, thank you for joining and participating with us today. Make sure to check in the general channel in Slack and sign up for our raffle that we will be doing later this afternoon for some lifetime memberships for WordPress and Drupal training. Some awesome prizes from some of our sponsors. All right, without further ado, we're going to open this up to Suzanne. Suzanne, while you introduce yourself, I'll unmute everybody. So remember, you'll be able to mute yourself. So if you're in a noisy place, please be considerate of us and try to only unmute when you have a comment or a question. Suzanne, it's all yours.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. This is my first time at CMS Philly or Drupadelphia. I never got down to Philadelphia for this conference. I'm really excited.
Oh, there, I just unmuted everybody. Sorry. Thanks.
So
they'll be able to unmute themselves if they once they click on their audio settings. Sorry, Suzanne.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So this is a roundtable session, so I'm hoping it will be really interactive and that we'll be able to all kind of share some ideas, and hopefully some more people will trickle in after lunchtime. Just to introduce myself, Suzanne Dergacheva. I work at Evolving Web. We're a Drupal agency here in Montreal. And I sort of started out in the CMS world back in 2007. I was building websites with WordPress and Ruby on Rails, and then ended up getting really into Drupal. And now I do a lot of Drupal trainings, and I'm on the board of the Drupal Association. But I also have a real passion for UX and kind of making it easier for people to use Drupal, but also kind of on the front end for our clients that we work with, trying to help them create interfaces that are easier for their users. So that's something I've spent a lot of time working on and thinking about in the last few years. So since we're such a small group, do people want to introduce themselves? If anyone wants to unmute and just say your name and maybe what you do.
I'll buy everybody a minute so they can figure out their audio settings. Hopefully they can unmute themselves now. You should be able to. They may have to reconnect or dial in by their phone. So we'll stall for a minute. I'm one of the organizers of CMS Philly. My name's Chris. I'm a former Drupal developer, project manager, Swiss Army knife. Muted by organizer. Let's try that again. Unmute all. Okay, try again, Jeff. Maybe I have to unmute everybody manually. There we go.
All right, yeah, I can get through now. Thank you.
Awesome. And
should I start introductions?
Yeah, sure, please.
So my name is Jeff. I'm designing a website for a nonprofit, which is going to be intensely collaborative in theory. And I'm entirely self-taught at UX, so I just came here to get some ideas from professionals to be a little more professional in how I'm doing the approach.
Great. Anyone else want to introduce yourselves? Ashley, do you want to try again unmuting? Maybe it will work now.
Oh, sure.
Oh, there you
go. I'm Ashley Ryan. I'm the manager of web and mobile services at Lehigh University. It's about an hour and a half north of Philly. I think my team does a pretty good job at UX, but it's always, I think, interesting to see what everyone else is doing and see what's, talked about that we might not be considering.
Nice. Anyone else? There is also a chat, so if you want, you can put some information there. I can read it out.
I think now that I've asked a question, I think I am unable to ask another until I can't put anything in the chat until somebody clicks it as answered.
Oh,
Is
wow.
my guess. Yeah, having told you we're muted, I now don't get a keyboard when I tap on that again. Just letting you know.
Okay, thanks for that feedback. I didn't know that. Yeah, I marked the question as answered and deleted it. That's interesting.
Okay, there's also a chat, so if you want to use the chat, you can go ahead. All right. Well, we'll get started. So if people want to figure out how to unmute themselves later. So this is a roundtable, so it's going to be way more interesting if you all jump in and participate. So I have a few questions that we can use to kind of just guide the conversation, but of course we can always veer off and talk about other things. So I think when you first tackle, getting into user experience, it can be really overwhelming at first because maybe you're doing a redesign and there's a lot of things to consider at once. So when we start a new project, we always try and focus the team around a problem that we're trying to solve. So in terms of user experience, that often means trying to narrow down and focus on one particular audience or one particular aspect of the website. So for example, it might be like our search is really hard to use, or it could be this type of user just isn't engaging with the site at all and we don't know how to reach them or we don't know how to serve them better. And sometimes it even means stepping back and not even thinking about the website at all, but just like what is our purpose and what are we trying to achieve in general? How does the website fit in to that whole experience? And so I thought we could maybe start by sharing a challenge. It doesn't have to be like the biggest, you don't have to think too hard on this, but just like what is a challenge that you're trying to solve that might be particularly tricky or that you think is really important for your organization. And think about it, not so much from what your organization is trying to achieve, but like what is a user challenge? And if you have many projects you're working on, you can just pick one that you're maybe struggling with a bit.
So I can give you like a general overview question. So my organization is set up to be widely distributed internationally, and most of our projects are supposed to be generated from the grassroots, proposed by them, approved by the board, and then they run with it. So my two concerns are, one, when the website launches, as soon as I finish writing the damn thing, the first thing I'm concerned about is having a ghost town without having seed information in there to get people started, to break the ice. And my second concern is that I'm a professional writer by trade, so I can write very good technical documentation, but I don't want somebody to have to read a 100-page manual to know how to navigate both the site and the organization's business practices. So I was thinking of using the built-in tours function to show them around the site. I was thinking of getting volunteers to be support people. Try to think of non-technical solutions for this, but what I truly want is a slippery slope where somebody reading the site will accidentally start to get involved and then find themselves getting more and more involved just because the UX provides for that. So that's my overall question.
So in your case, like, do people, do you have this up and running right now? Do people have to log in to access this, or is this just accessible through your public-facing website?
There's going to be a public side of the site for people who are considering becoming members, and all of the involvement will be from people who've already paid dues to become members. So I've got very little concern about people joining because we have a public interest aspect that people will join just out of altruism. But we're doing a pivot from philanthropy to membership dues, so we have no idea how this is going to work. Basically the idea is to put up one particular model. We'll pivot if the members want something different once they see it in action. But obviously we want to give it a chance to work as described first. And because we've never had membership models before, it's entirely we have no data until the website launches with the new interactive tools to know how it's going to go.
Okay. Well, anyone have any words of wisdom for Jeff of what to try?
I'm glad this is a hard problem. It makes me feel better.
Yeah, it's hard when you're first starting, if it's a brand new product like this, if you're not sure yet like what the offering's going to look like. And sometimes it's hard because you don't have anything when you start with to test. So it's hard to know like what you'd even present if you were trying to get feedback. So it's sort of this like problem of bootstrapping and getting started. And especially when it's sort of something you have to log into and it's interactive, it can be a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of variables. So one thing that I found useful at this really early stage is to do a comparison study. So to kind of go out there and look for like, what are 3 other services that are similar, that have kind of this similar, sounds like community building and kind of online collaboration that you're trying to achieve, and like what are some options that you have, and then maybe think about how that would translate to your own project. And with those examples, you could maybe do some usability testing on those. Like you could just throw them in front of your users and see how they react.
The best I have so far is that we've been around for 40 years. We have a history where about 10 to 20% of our members become the sort of organizers that propose things within chapters and within national structures. The main question I have is that, because it's a one-person programming job that's fallen on my shoulders, I'm using a turnkey collaboration system called Open Social under Drupal 8. And basically, it's not quite what I wanted, but it's the only supported tool that's out there right now because the other ones have fallen by the wayside. So I think I'm going to be constrained by my tools unless I do something that's just much more. I mean, this is already a year overdue in terms of the schedule that I had for it. So yeah. I think I'm stuck with my tools for now until we get it launched, and then maybe we can iterate those as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And like getting some kind of content up and running so you can start experimenting. So does anyone else, maybe Ashley, do you have a UX challenge you're trying to solve?
Yeah, I would say for us, so accessibility is something that we've always cared about and always focused on, but recently we're trying to really put forth a big effort for accessibility, especially as we're moving to Drupal 7 from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. So we're trying to really kind of consider it right off the bat and not, after the fact. But the one challenge for us is sort of balancing accessibility with UX. So things like, not having too much redundant link text or suspicious link text, like read more links if you have like 10 news articles you're presenting and then saying read more at the end of each like snippet or teaser for the article. We're kind of in this position of like, it's kind of nice for people who don't have a disability seeing the read more button, but we understand that with screen readers, it makes things a little difficult. So, I mean, that's just one example, but just in general, kind of the balance of UX and accessibility can be a little tough at times.
Yeah, does anyone have experience with that?
Well, I'll add a second question is that over here, because of just the amount of throughput that has to go onto the site, I certainly am interested in turnkey tools. I don't have time to add additional programming right now to really make the site as accessible as it's going to be when there are other volunteers working with me. So if anybody can suggest a turnkey that turns a backdrop site and a D8 site into something that's more accessible and out of the box, and certainly I'm going to activate those modules.
Yeah, the thing is, so like Drupal is accessible out of the box. It's when you start to customize it that it gets usually you start to introduce problems. Like you start to add links, and then the links they read more, and this is where the problems come from. So, anyone else have anything to share? I have some ideas, but I want to give others a chance. So one thing I would say, just in terms of the whole usability and accessibility issue, there's an overlap, but just because something is accessible, because something follows an accessibility checklist, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for those users who are using assistive technologies. Like disabled users are maybe going to have a hard time finding their way around, just like you might have a hard time finding your way around if you're using the browser, navigating as normal. So what I would recommend, like a good practice that you could build in, and it does take time, so it's kind of like extra overhead for you, but using assistive technologies to actually test the site as part of your usability testing. And it can be really simple, but just having a screen reader that you can use, and just making sure that when you're navigating through the site, and maybe you're just using the outline tool. So like if you try NVDA or you try VoiceOver, they have these outline tools, so you can kind of see how a screen reader would let a user skim through a page. And you want to just check that all the links that are showing up in that, and the outline of the headings and other kind of landmarks on the page, are really well identified. And often it's not actually, like if you're talking, Jeff, about using open social, so you might not be customizing how everything's configured, but you are customizing the content. And so often it's like what you label a section, or what you label a link, or what you use as a heading, that's going to impact the experience. So that would be my main input, is that usually that kind of user experience that you're creating, it's all created from the semantics of the page. So it's really just the content that you're filling into those buckets that are going to impact the experience. And then sometimes if you're using a tool like in Drupal, you have these new like layout builder and other tools for building more visual pages. Of course, every CMS has these tools, and the more flexibility you have, the kind of further you're going outside of the box, and then it becomes often you're introducing accessibility problems, and sometimes it's through the content. So there's just some observations I've made.
And that's exactly something that we're looking into doing. So that, of course, like using Layout Builder with custom blocks. So that, of course, introduces another level of difficulty there, but we're also trying to focus a lot on the editor experience this time around, and building in ways people can select different headers for their blocks, things like that, but then also check to see, I know like automating it only takes you so far, so those sorts of things, but in conjunction with training, and hopefully Layout Builder takes away a lot of the custom development work we have to do right now, and that frees some time up for training. So hopefully hopefully it works out, because we really, I think training will be a big thing, since when it comes down to it, a lot of accessibility involves simply the content that's put in there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, putting the accessibility part into the training and teaching it alongside a new tool. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
Certainly.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, kind of similar response to the last question too. I think just looking at other sites and seeing what they do, finding out who's been sued already, and learning from their mistakes might work.
I was wondering if you install Mac OS, which I was just doing yesterday, and it sits for about 30 seconds, it automatically plays a voiceover message telling people how to turn it on in case people are sitting there waiting for something to happen. I'm wondering if somebody can put a link in the Slack, if there's something similar that if people land on the member services page, that the website can identify whether a screen reader's in use and automatically read some text that wouldn't necessarily be visible to other users.
Well, yeah, that you can have text that's read on the screen reader, not to other users. But I don't know that you'd want it to be like the normal experience. I think would be, you start to tab through the site, you start to use the tools. Like people who use screen readers are going to know what shortcuts to use. So I don't think you need to introduce something that's automatic.
That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, so I had another question to spark a new conversation, and maybe this will get some of the silent people in the session thinking. So if anyone has anything to share, my next question is: have you had any UX research failures, or maybe you want to share, user experiences that you've built that have been failures? Does anyone have anything to share? And I can share one to start if you want. Okay, I'll start. So I'm usually involved in kind of the discovery phase of our projects, where we're going in and talking to the client about what they need, and we do these workshops, and we try and invite users to come to the workshops to give their input. So instead of just asking like the stakeholders, the CEO of the company, what should this website do, we try and get the users in the room and to say, what's their story, how do they interact with the website, and just get some ideas. And we ran a workshop for a client a few months ago, and we invited all these users. We invited students. It was a university, and we only had one student who showed up. So even though some had RSVP'd and said they were going to come, I guess they weren't as dependable as we expected, and we only got one user in the room. So that means that all the input that we got for the website was from this one user, and it was great. He had such a great story, and we kept coming back to his story again and again. But I just knew that, like, we should have really gotten a lot more users involved in the process and gotten a lot more students participating.
Did you offer to feed them? That usually works for us.
Yeah. So one advice that I have heard since then is that, feeding them is one thing. I think we did have food. It was that you can't, rather than offering to feed them, actually sitting somewhere and having like chocolate available right on the spot and just asking them on the spot for feedback is like a surefire way to get students and probably anybody to give you some input. Any other ideas anyone wants to share?
I have a question about menu design and how best to do that. Right now I'm on a D7 site and we're getting ready to move to D8. And one of the complaints that I received when we were just doing some reviews about what should be included on the new site is that people have problems finding everything. Now, for me, I can find everything, but then again, I'm dealing with it all the time. But I'm
Right.
just wondering, do you have any suggestions or tips just about what to consider as you design the menu? And I guess that has.
So one mistake that I think we see a lot in menu design is just designing for how an organization is structured versus how users think about the content. And so it can be hard to approach a redesign of a menu when you're used to how it currently works. And so one thing to try is to really take a step back and think about all the things that you need, the most important things that people have to find in the menu, and separate that out into different cards. And often when we do this, we actually use cards. So if you see in this on you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's all these sticky notes that we get. So often we'll go and just brainstorm like what are all the main components. We put them onto cards, and then we try and get people in the room who have different ideas about the users and how they think about the content, and we try and sort these, and we kind of try and separate it out from actually the menu structure, because you don't have to put out all the important pieces of content necessarily as pages in the menu. But just try and like gather how the content should in general be organized. And sometimes you end up back to what you currently have, but sometimes there'll be a few key differences, or you might come up with an alternate approach. And then if you get an alternate approach, like maybe you have your current menu, but then you have this new idea of how you can organize it, then another technique that we use is using something called like tree testing. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No, I haven't. No.
It's where you take just the so if you look here on this task 1 of 3, the screenshot in the bottom right hand corner, it's this testing where you ask someone, okay, go and research, what are the scholarships available at this school, and you watch them, or you don't actually watch them, but you track how they search through the menu and whether it's obvious to them what to click on. And so you might find that, with one menu organization, 75% of people go through the right path, and with another one, maybe it's only 25% and everybody else does something different. So you can kind of test which one is more successful, and you can do a really quick test. You don't even have to have like all your wireframes and things set up. You're just testing the basically your sitemap, just the menu tree.
So how are you tracking them? Do you film them or tape them, or is some other application that you use to actually track their steps or how they move through the process?
So this is what the tool that we used in this one is called Optimal Workshop, but there's a lot of tools that you can use for this. And with this one, you don't have to set up interviews or sessions or record anything. It just automatically records. So you just send, maybe you're testing 2 versions, and you'd send 50% of the people in the study one link, you'd send 50% the other link, and then you just see what they do. And the tool just records all the feedback and tells you which one worked better.
I see. Now, do you have a combination of just random users and, for instance, staff, or how do you do that?
That's a great question. I think it depends on it. Like it always depends on who you can get. In this case, like it was a university. So often with universities, you can get student volunteers. If it's kind of a more specialized situation, you might want to get users who are kind of interested in the topic, so they'll at least be familiar with the terms, like the labels on the menu links. But often you can get anybody to do this kind of test. It doesn't have to be somebody who's actually in the domain.
Okay.
Kind of depends how technical the content is.
Okay. Good to know.
Well,
Thank you.
one of the best ideas that I've seen, which I was going to steal for my own beginner purposes, was to use the analytics tools, like Google Analytics, one of those. And if you have menu items to places that people are not going, remove those. And if you have places that people are going that don't have a menu item, add a menu item for those things. And then it's the analytics you're running already to see how sticky the site is and where people are going is spitting out what your menu should be.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great idea. One thing I'm always worried about is that people are going to pages because they're prominent in the menu, and then they're not going to other pages because they're not. So you're sort of biasing your own results a little bit, but it is really good to look at that research to see if, if you have a link in the main menu and it's right there and nobody's using that page, or they're using it and then they're backing out, then for sure it's something to consider. Do you really need that? And a lot of big organizations, of course, politically end up with way too many things in the main menu because everybody wants their piece of the pie and everyone wants their department or their initiative kind of highlighted. So maybe that leads nicely into this other topic we could go into of like tools that you would recommend. So does anyone have any? I mentioned Optimal Workshop for the tree testing. And Jeff just mentioned Google Analytics, which is kind of an obvious one, but it's like you forget that that is a tool for user experience improvements. Does anyone else have any other go-to tools?
It doesn't apply to analysis, but I've been using draw.io for wireframes, just because I've been trying to use specific wireframe tools, and I found them just way too complicated to use. So when I'm coming up with workflows and user stories, draw.io is just the easiest way to build those images that I've been able to find. But there's no analysis for that. It's just front end stuff.
Yeah, it's nice to have tools, especially like that you can collaborate with people on and kind of get more people involved in that process. Sometimes that's a good feature. Also for wireframes, like if you want to do user testing, it's usually helpful to do it sooner. The sooner you do the testing, the easier it is to integrate what you find into your design and then into the actual build. So if your draw.io makes it easy to kind of set up prototyping, I don't know if it does that. Like we usually use Sketch, and then we use InVision for the kind of putting those wireframes together, and then you can link them up and people can click through the wireframes, and then you can actually run user testing just on those wireframes. So you can show people a design of maybe like, here's the homepage, what are you drawn to, what would you click on, get their input at that stage before you start doing full mock-ups and other designs.
So I was looking at Balsamiq for that kind of wireframing. And the problem is that my beta users have no idea what a wireframe is. So I was thinking that by the time that I did enough of a mock-up that they understood what they were looking at that point I'm taking way too much time from actual website design. So
Right,
are you saying that these are easier tools where you can build something a little faster?
I don't know that you'll be able to build something faster. It's just that you could easily link the frames together. I don't know how easily you can do that with Balsamiq, but I assume you can do the same thing. But the fact that you can link it together, like if you click on an item and then you go to the other page, it kind of makes the testing a bit smoother. But I know your pain feeling that, like, if you're the developer and the designer and you're doing the testing, it's really hard to make time for any of that.
It's more that for that kind of thing, it's faster for me to just use the development site as the prototype. Because
Right.
I can build out menus and pages there faster than I can in the wireframe tool.
Yeah, if you have especially if you're using a distribution and you already have a framework. I'll just mention one other thing. And then of course if other people have ideas of tools too, you can put them in the chat. There's like a little chat at the bottom of this panel that you can put things in if you'd rather not go on turn on your audio. One other thing that we found useful other than just testing, which is kind of formal, you have to set it up, you have to recruit people, it feels like this whole insurmountable thing. We also run these little UX feedback sessions at our office, which is also work to organize, but you can do this more informally. So this picture down here on my slide is a workshop that we ran. So there'll be a few presenters who just demo a site or demo an app or even just the beginning of an idea, maybe a couple sketches or wireframes. And then they just show it. They don't really present a lot of information, but they just show the interface. And then people give their first impressions. And then people say what they like and people say what they don't like. And it's not the same as user testing because you have a crowd and, they're not necessarily your users exactly, but it is nice just to get the feedback from people who are brand new and maybe aren't familiar with the interface and the content that you're working with, and just to get these first impressions. And so we found that just a really useful way to get some very initial feedback, but it might be obvious things that you're not thinking about. And you could, of course, run that more informally, if you just have like a group of people, maybe at your organization who aren't on the project, and you just organize a quick, 20-minute session where you show it to them, they say what they think, they say what they like, and they say what they don't like. And what we find really useful in this one is to, we don't have like a whole conversation. Like it's not like somebody says, oh, I don't like how the menu is structured, and then you have an argument about it. It's just like they say what they think, you write it down, and then you move on. So it's really quick. Anyone else have tools that they use? Everyone's just really like low tech with their UX work. Does anyone need a tool for something? Like you're wondering, what should I use for testing or?
I would love to hear anything you have to say on that topic.
Sonia, were you gonna add something?
No, I'm interested in what you have to say too, because I'm really.
Okay, I'll mention a few things. If people have other ideas, throw them in the chat, and it'd be great to get some more ideas going. So just some things that I have here, I guess. The tool up in the top corner here is called Miro, and there's a few of these virtual whiteboard tools that have become really popular, obviously in the last 6 weeks. And I found it useful because it's not just one person presenting and putting ideas up on a board. With this tool, you can create multiple accounts. So if you had maybe, it doesn't work well with maybe 15 people, but if you have 5 to 8 people, it works really well. So in this setting, people can create their own sticky notes and you can brainstorm ideas together. And so you could use this for, say, that other idea that I was sharing about grouping content together and creating a sitemap collectively. But you could also use it just to get general feedback. So this whiteboard, for example, that we have here is just a really general, like what works, what doesn't work, what are your ideas? And it's really nice in these sessions to get stakeholders involved or users involved in brainstorming the ideas or coming up with the content collaboration. And I find that if you are working online, it's always harder to get people to speak up, like we are seeing in this roundtable today. So actually having a way for them to write something and not to have to say it out loud, but just to think about it and write it down. I find that tools that allow them to do that are always good. Another idea, I have a little sitemap here in the bottom left screenshot. I actually don't remember what tool this is, but the site mapping tool that we use now is called Flow Map. So if anyone's familiar with that, it's a way of just basically building out the nodes of your sitemap. But what I really like about it is that you can make annotations. So say you have your top level items here, say it's a university site, and you have, you know, your faculty, your alumni, you have a page for admissions, you have a page that's maybe had to get involved, or, you know, admissions and financing, or, you know, you come up with whatever these top level pages are. And then obviously you can create sub pages, but you can also write little notes. So even at the level of the sitemap, you might say, okay, this page, like the alumni page, really needs to have these 3 messages on it. And then you can write that down in the sitemap and make a little comment, and then people can talk about it and give their feedback. So usually if you're building a big site, you know, you don't want to create a wireframe for every single page. So this kind of helps you skip that step and just have notes about pages with some kind of content information, rather than going to the trouble to create a wireframe for everything. So that's a nice tool. Optimal workshop. So I mentioned the tree testing where you're testing the sitemap, but it also has lots of other tools for things like surveys. So often it's hard to get user involvement, but sending out a surveys are really easy for people to respond to because it's asynchronous. They can just respond in their own time. So it has a tool for that, for just going through and collecting results. And then it also has a tool for card sorting, which is a more formal method of deciding what content goes with what. So that the idea of like taking these little cards of content and grouping them together, it allows people to do that on their own. And so they're not influencing each other like they would be in a workshop. They're just deciding on their own what goes together.
Do you also do a content audit when you're working on this, and how?
Yeah, so a
Okay.
content audit would be a more detailed review of the content. Like I would recommend in kind of a content sorting exercise where you're deciding what goes with what, I wouldn't do that with every individual piece of content because it becomes too long. Usually you want to think more about the sections and the groupings. But if you're going through a content audit, the way that I would recommend, like there's tools specifically for it, but a tool like Screaming Frog would help you analyze what are the most used pages on your website, and it'll give you some data for each one, like, you know, the URL and the structure and all of that, how many people are visiting those pages, and you can kind of prioritize them. So you might say, okay, let's go through the top 200 pages on our website and let's decide, are we keeping this page? Are we removing it? Are we rewriting it? And you can use just like a shared sheet for that, like a shared spreadsheet. And I find the hardest part of a content audit is deciding who owns the content. So I don't know, Sonia, if you're working at an institution or organization.
An organization. We're a nonprofit public access station. So we have members and just the general public coming to the site. So, you know, it's a combination of people logging in and trying to get their work done, and just folks trying to find out what we do.
Yeah. So it can be a challenge sometimes trying to get people in an organization to take ownership of content if it's not all centralized. So sometimes it's like one team, like marketing and communications, and you're just like, that team is responsible for everything. But sometimes, you know, it's content where it's like, oh, somebody's running this program and they need to update their content. And so it can be hard to assign that responsibility. So what I find helpful is if you just say, okay, this group is responsible for this page, and our suggestion is that this page is removed, or this page is rewritten, or that we replace it or redirect people, or whatever the decision is. Kind of make it the suggestion, and then just say, here's the spreadsheet, here's what we decided, now you have 2 weeks to give your input, or something like that. So a content audit can be tricky in getting people to decide what to do with content, but sometimes you have to nudge them a little bit to get them to make a decision.
I mean, most of it I've been responsible for, but I'm trying to get more of the staff involved in actually working on it and creating content. So this might be a good opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, and then you get to the fun part, like what Ashley was talking about with the layout builder. Like, you can maybe entice them and say, oh, well, if you participate in this content audit, then maybe you're gonna have some input on what your new pages are gonna look like. And they're, you know, it could look really awesome, but you have to get involved.
Right. Sweeten the pot.
Yeah, give them the carrot, like get them excited.
Okay, thanks.
I can add a DIY tool that I've added to this. For the site that I'm building, every new page has 2 taxonomies of either text, of both text status and backend status. So text status always starts out as a draft. If I finish the text and I want the board to review it, I put it into in review. In a case where I had specific people that I was assigning the pages to review it, I could just add a taxonomy with their names, and then could then come up with a, you know, click on the name and I get a list of all the things that I should follow up with them on. Whereas backend status tells me whether if it needs programming work, whether the programming is not started, whether it's in progress, whether it's ready for review, whether it's been QA tested. And this is just something that I built because I knew that I could use it to spit my own to-do list back at me. But I think that, you know, again, on the topic of using the website to be its own wireframe, I find that to be very useful.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't heard that idea before. That's awesome. Any other ideas here to share?
The mention of taxonomy just triggered something. I guess that would be a good way to do some grouping of the pages in your content, just so to get you started, just to have people think about it. You know, because taxonomy and search, is it working or not, or do you have to rethink some of the taxonomy that you're using? You know, so that's good.
Yeah, I find it's always interesting when you get actual users in the room and you listen to the words that they use to describe, you know, I'm going to go search for this, or I'm going to go find one of that. And sometimes the words that they use don't line up with the taxonomy terms that have already been used to tag the content on the site.
Right.
So it's good to listen and then to see, does the taxonomy, does the language of it make sense? And then how is it actually being used? Like, is it used for search, or is it used to show related content?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about the plugins that generate tag clouds based on text matching, that just, you know, come up with their own tags so users don't have to do it as they go?
Oh yeah, that's a tricky one. I think it's really important, if you're using auto tagging, to actually define the tags in advance. I find usually auto tagging, if it's just completely arbitrary, like it'll maybe come up with 1,000 new tags on your site, and they won't necessarily correspond to how a person would tag content. So it might be a good idea if you're starting off with auto tagging to test it first and then to define the taxonomy terms that it uses.
Yeah, I think defining it is the way to go, because with spelling mistakes and all the random way, just like you said, people have different ways of searching for things, and then it all gets added to your site. So it's just too much. It can be too much in terms of terms to use and what people use. Yeah.
One thing with search, Sonia, I'll just mention one other thing. If you are trying to come up with a better search and you have a lot of content, it can be really hard to design a good search experience. And we've always been attached to using Apache Solr because it's very flexible and very powerful and works really well with Drupal, and we always like push for that. But recently I experimented with a tool called Cluedo, which is like it's paid, but it just sits on top of your site and it creates the search page. And then it has this UI for just adjusting what are the search filters and what gets prioritized. And it's nice because it's just so easy to update how it's configured. So it helps you a little bit with just iterating on the search experience.
I'm sorry, that you said Cluedo?
Cluedo, like C-L-U-D-O.
Yeah, okay, because we
And
use
there's some
Apache
other tools like that too, but that's just one example.
Okay. I mean, we have Apache Solr on our site, but I don't think it's configured. It's not peaked and optimized, so it doesn't work as well as I wish it would. So that's something that we have to look into.
It's just a lot of work to configure it because I mean, Apache Solr, like the same tool that's used to power a relatively small website, a few thousand pages. It's the same tool that's used for these huge websites like, I don't know, eHarmony, and I don't know if Amazon's still using it, but Apache Solr is like super enterprise tool. So it's just super complicated to get it to do what you want because there's so many settings.
Right.
I think that's part of the challenge. It's not that it's not capable of creating a great search experience. It's just kind of hard to wrangle it to do what you want.
Agree.
So I think we're going to wrap up soon. Thanks so much for all of you who participated and listening in and chatting too. If you have other ideas that pop into your head, don't hesitate to head over to the chat on, to the Slack channel. So there's a Slack channel for the UX Roundtable. And also just wanted to mention that as a Drupal company, we do a lot of Drupal trainings. And because of COVID-19, a lot of people can't really afford things right now or don't have budgets for anything. So we're giving away some free training to people who need it. So we have a scholarship program you can apply for on our website. And feel free to just email me too if you have any questions about that.
Suzanne, sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure, warning, we've probably got about 2 minutes before we have to wrap things up.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So thanks everyone for participating, and I really appreciated, especially Jeff and Ashley and Sonia for jumping in with all your great questions and ideas, and good luck with all your UX projects.
Thank you.
Thanks.